how medieval monarchs ruled with fear, to the countless nameless victims of unchecked power throughout history, whose silent screams echo down the corridors of time, a testament to the enduring absurdity of tyranny. May their suffering serve as a darkly humorous reminder that even the most ludicrously cruel decrees eventually meet their inevitable and often hilariously ironic end. This book, dedicated to those who suffered in silence, aims not to glorify the monsters of the past, but rather to dissect their methods with the detached amusement of a pathologist examining a particularly grotesque specimen. After all, what better way to confront the horrors of history than with a healthy dose of gallows humor? To the modern day courtiers, spin doctors, and purveyors of carefully crafted narratives, may your meticulously constructed facades crumble under the weight of their own preposterous contradictions, leaving you exposed in all your self serving glory. This work, dedicated with thinly veiled sarcasm, serves as a cautionary tale of the pitfalls of unchecked ambition. Remember, dear readers, even kings eventually get their comeuppance, sometimes in ways far more amusing than they ever anticipated. Their meticulously crafted reigns, built on the foundation of fear and oppression, invariably end in a chaotic and often deeply satisfying implosion, like a particularly spectacular soufflé collapsing on a royal banquet table. To those who find solace in the macabre, the cynical, and the darkly funny, this book is for you. For you, dear reader, recognize that even the most grim and brutal chapters of history can be viewed through the prism of sardonic wit. You understand that the human capacity for both unspeakable cruelty and breathtaking hypocrisy is a source of perpetual fascination, one worthy of contemplation, analysis, and yes, even laughter. After all, isn't dark humor the only appropriate response to the enduringly absurd spectacle of human folly? Laugh now, weep later, but most certainly learn from the follies of those who came before. And dear reader, never underestimate the power of a well-placed sardonic quip in the face of overwhelming oppression. The tyrants of the past might have wielded absolute power, but they never had the satisfying advantage of witty historical commentary. Okay, Chapter 1: The Absurdity of Absolute Power. The rain, a perpetually weeping sky, mirrored the mood of the kingdom of Viridia. For years it had rained, a ceaseless drizzle that seeped into the very bones of the land, a fitting backdrop to the reign of King Theron, a man whose obsession with control extended even to the very expression on his subjects' faces. Theron, a man whose portrait depicted him as a paragon of benevolent leadership, a sun-kissed visage with a gentle smile, was in reality a creature of profound paranoia, whose iron grip strangled the joy from his kingdom. His most infamous decree, the one that truly cemented his place in the annals of absurd tyranny, was the ban on laughter. Not a mere curtailment of boisterous merriment. Oh no, this was a complete eradication of all forms of levity. A giggle behind a hand, a smile that lingered too long, even the involuntary twitch of a lip, all were met with swift and brutal punishment. The kingdom, once a land of vibrant festivals and playful banter, had fallen silent, a mausoleum of muted misery. The streets, once echoing with the sounds of children's laughter, were now hushed and desolate, populated only by figures who moved with the grim determination of those condemned to a life devoid of mirth. The king's reasoning, as far as it could be deciphered through the layers of royal obfuscation and carefully crafted propaganda, was that laughter was a sign of weakness, a rebellion against the divine order he, as the divinely appointed ruler, had established. Joy, in Theron's twisted logic, was a dangerous distraction, a seed of dissent that could blossom into full-blown revolution. He saw himself as a gardener, meticulously weeding out any joyous growth, leaving behind only the barren landscape of unquestioning obedience. To laugh was to question, to smile was to harbor doubt, and doubt, Theron believed, was the most potent weapon against a ruler's authority. The implementation of the ban was, predictably, a farce. Elaborate networks of informants, often motivated by fear and self-preservation, spied on their neighbors, reporting even the slightest tremor of amusement. Whispers were stifled, jokes were left unfinished, and gatherings were conducted with the suffocating silence of a funeral procession. The spontaneity of human connection was replaced by a calculated, cautious existence, leaving individuals emotionally starved and perpetually on edge. It wasn't just laughter. Any expression of genuine human connection was repressed. Any overt sign of emotion was deemed treasonous. The irony, of course, was lost on King Theron. His iron fist, meant to silence dissent, instead bred a chilling, insidious form of resistance. The forced silence became a fertile ground for resentment, and the unspoken anger simmered beneath the surface of Viridia, waiting for the opportune moment to erupt. The king, ironically, found himself surrounded by a court of perpetually grim-faced courtiers, each carefully maintaining the expression of subservient obedience, while privately nurturing their own bitter fantasies of revenge. It was the kind of dystopian society that would make even George Orwell blush with envy. This morbid preoccupation with controlling emotions wasn't unique to Theron's reign. History is littered with examples of rulers attempting to orchestrate the emotional landscape of their people. From the meticulously crafted propaganda of totalitarian regimes to the modern-day manipulation of public opinion through social media algorithms, the underlying principle remains the same: control the narrative, and you control the populace. Theron's ban on laughter, though extreme in its application, wasn't entirely unique. It was merely an amplified reflection of a recurring pattern in the abuse of power. Think of the contemporary examples of controlled media, of governments that actively suppress dissent and punish those who dare to question the official narrative. These are merely echoes of Theron's reign, adapted to suit the modern technological landscape. The methods may have changed, but the underlying impulse to control the emotional and intellectual landscape remains frighteningly familiar. Theron's obsession with eliminating laughter wasn't merely an act of arbitrary cruelty. It was a symptom of a deeper malaise, the crippling fear of the unknown, the terror of losing control. The kingdom's infrastructure, once a testament to the prosperity of Viridia, crumbled under the weight of Theron's paranoia. Construction projects stalled, not because of a lack of resources, but because the architects and builders feared their work wouldn't meet the king's ever-shifting standards, their creative innovations viewed as potential threats. Innovation itself was strangled. The very fabric of society was unraveled by Theron's obsessive need for total control. What was the point of innovation if any sign of progress could be interpreted as a challenge to the crown? The agricultural output plummeted. Farmers, fearing accusations of hoarding or negligence, stopped producing beyond their bare minimum, leading to widespread food shortages. The arts were stifled. The vibrant tapestry of Viridian culture was replaced by a monotonous gray uniformity, echoing the prevailing mood of fear and depression. Even the natural beauty of the kingdom seemed to wither under the weight of Theron's reign. The vibrant colors of the wildflowers replaced by a bleak, monochromatic palette. It was a reign of oppressive grayscale. Furthermore, the suppression of laughter had a corrosive effect on the very fabric of Viridian society. Family bonds fractured under the pressure of constant surveillance and the fear of betrayal. Friendships became strained as individuals turned inward, fearing even the smallest signs of affection might be misinterpreted as a subversive act. The communal spirit of Viridia, once a source of strength and resilience, was decimated, replaced by a suffocating atmosphere of isolation and suspicion. It was a society where even the smallest acts of human connection were fraught with peril, a chilling commentary on the destructive potential of unchecked power. The ban on laughter wasn't an isolated incident. It was merely the most visible manifestation of a deeper issue, a systematic dismantling of individual freedom and human dignity. This pervasive control extended to every facet of life in Viridia, from the food the people ate to the thoughts they dared to have. King Theron's regime was a masterclass in totalitarian control, a nightmarish example of how a ruler's paranoia could decimate a nation. The parallels to modern society, though thankfully less extreme in their manifestation, are undeniable. The insidious creep of surveillance technologies, the chilling effect of oppressive laws targeting freedom of expression, the calculated manipulation of public narratives, all these are worrying symptoms of a similar disease, the lust for power and the willingness to sacrifice individual liberty in its name. Theron's reign, though a fictional construct, serves as a stark warning, a dark reflection of the fragility of freedom and the eternal vigilance required to safeguard it. It's a cautionary tale, dressed in the grim attire of medieval fantasy, but carrying a message that resonates profoundly in the contemporary world. The rain continued to fall, a somber testament to the enduring legacy of a king who forbade laughter. But in the whispers of the wind, a different sound was beginning to rise, the quiet, defiant rumble of a gathering storm. The rain, a relentless curtain of gray, seemed to perpetually dampen the spirits of Viridia, mirroring the suffocating grip of King Theron's regime. His ban on laughter was merely the most visible symptom of a deeper malaise, a sickness that festered in the shadows and pulsed with the chilling efficiency of the Crimson Hand, his secret police. These were not simply uniformed officers. They were wraiths, specters weaving through the cobbled streets and hidden alleys of the kingdom, their presence a constant chilling reminder of the king's absolute power. Unlike the crude, overt brutality of a common thug, the Crimson Hand operated with surgical precision. Their methods were subtle, insidious, designed to sow fear and paranoia, not through outright violence, but through a carefully orchestrated campaign of intimidation. A misplaced whisper overheard in a tavern, a glance deemed too inquisitive, a joke interpreted as seditious. These seemingly innocuous acts were enough to attract the attention of the Crimson Hand. Their ranks were filled with individuals plucked from the darkest corners of society, disgraced nobles seeking redemption through treachery, ambitious commoners lusting for power, and hardened criminals seeking a reprieve from the gallows. Loyalty to the crown was less a motivating factor than the sheer terror of defying it. They were bound together not by ideology but by fear, their shared understanding a grim dance of survival. Their interrogation techniques were legendary in their cruelty. Unlike the blunt force of the common torturer, the Crimson Hand favored psychological manipulation, slowly chipping away at the victim's resolve. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, and carefully crafted illusions were their weapons of choice. They were masters of gaslighting, twisting the victim's perceptions until they confessed to crimes they didn't commit, often believing their own fabricated confessions. The Crimson Hand wasn't merely concerned with extracting confessions. They were the king's executioners, assassins, and enforcers of his will. Their victims vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and the chilling realization that Theron's reach extended into every corner of his kingdom. Some met their end in clandestine alleyway killings. Others disappeared into the depths of the king's dungeons, their fates unknown, their screams lost in the incessant drone of the rain. Their operations were shrouded in secrecy. Few knew their true numbers, their organization, or their ultimate goals. Their effectiveness stemmed from their anonymity, their ability to remain hidden within the very fabric of Viridian society. They were ghosts in the machine, unseen, yet ever present, their chilling presence a testament to the pervasive nature of Theron's reign. The Crimson Hand's influence extended far beyond the physical realm. Their mere existence fostered an atmosphere of self-censorship, a constant undercurrent of fear that permeated every aspect of Viridian life. Individuals hesitated to speak their minds, lest a casual remark be overheard and misinterpreted. Friendships crumbled, family bonds fractured under the weight of suspicion and mistrust, every interaction laden with the fear of betrayal. The parallels between the Crimson Hand and modern-day surveillance states are unsettlingly clear. The same insidious creep of technology, the same mass collection of data, the same erosions of civil liberties in the name of national security, they're all echoes of Theron's reign, adapted to the technological landscape of the 21st century. Think of the algorithms that track our online activity, the facial recognition software that monitors our every move, the constant surveillance carried out through our mobile phones. These technologies are, in essence, the modern equivalent of the Crimson Hand's informants, silently collecting data, creating a vast tapestry of our lives, susceptible to manipulation and abuse. The difference lies primarily in the scale and sophistication. The intent remains chillingly similar. Theron's kingdom, shrouded in perpetual rain and enforced silence, serves as a chilling parable. It reminds us that the methods of oppression may evolve, but the fundamental desire for power and control remains a constant, a dark thread that weaves through the tapestry of human history. The seemingly quaint ban on laughter becomes a metaphor for the wider suppression of dissent and free thought. The Crimson Hand, with their shadowy operations, represents the chilling efficiency of totalitarian regimes, a constant, unseen presence that silences dissent through fear and intimidation. The pervasive surveillance that characterized Viridia under Theron's reign is mirrored in today's society in ways that are often subtle and insidious. The seemingly innocuous collection of data through online activities, the constant tracking of our movements through various technological means, and the potential for misuse of this information are all elements that echo the tactics employed by the Crimson Hand. The chilling reality is that the information collected isn't always used to prevent crime or protect national security. Instead, it can be weaponized, used to manipulate public opinion, suppress dissent, or even target specific individuals for intimidation or worse. This creates a climate of fear and self censorship where individuals are hesitant to express their true opinions or engage in activities that might be perceived as challenging to the authorities. The parallels to Viridia's oppressive atmosphere are stark and alarming. The king's obsession wasn't just about eliminating laughter or dissent, it was about absolute, unchecked control. He didn't just want obedience, he craved total submission, a population devoid of independent thought or action. The Crimson Hand was his instrument, his enforcer, ensuring that the slightest deviation from the prescribed norm was swiftly and brutally dealt with. They were the shadow of his authority, a constant, pervasive reminder of the power he wielded. The constant rain in Viridia wasn't simply a meteorological phenomenon. It symbolized the oppressive atmosphere that suffocated the kingdom. It was a constant, relentless reminder of the king's control, a mirror to the ever-present threat of the Crimson Hand. It represented the dampening of spirits, the stifling of joy, and the erosion of human connection. The rain was, in its own way, an instrument of his tyranny, a constant, depressing presence that reflected the king's reign of fear. The absurdity of Theron's reign lay not only in the ban on laughter, but also in the sheer ineffectiveness of his methods. His attempt to control every aspect of his kingdom's life, from the expressions on his subjects' faces to the very thoughts in their minds, led to a climate of widespread discontent and a simmering rebellion that was only a matter of time from erupting. The Crimson Hand, despite its brutal efficiency, could only suppress the symptoms, not that underlying disease of tyranny. The parallels to modern political landscapes are striking. We see echoes of Theron's paranoia in the efforts of some governments to control information, suppress dissent, and monitor their citizens. The methods may be more sophisticated now, utilizing advanced technology rather than the crude methods of a medieval secret police. But the underlying goal remains the same: absolute control. Theron's reign, therefore, serves as a cautionary tale, a dark mirror reflecting the dangers of unchecked power and the insidious nature of control. The Crimson Hand, with its shadow of fear and intimidation, stands as a symbol of the lengths to which those in authority might go to maintain their grip on power, a chilling reminder of the fragility of freedom and the constant vigilance required to safeguard it. The rain continued to fall, but in the whispers of the wind, The first crack of defiance could be heard, a sound promising change, a sound promising an end to the silence. The opulent tapestry that adorned the walls of King Theron's chambers seemed to mock the chill that permeated the very air. Gold thread shimmered, depicting scenes of mythical hunts and glorious victories, a stark contrast to the reality of a court steeped in treachery and fear. The king, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, sat upon a throne carved from a single colossal piece of obsidian, its darkness mirroring the depths of his ambition. His family, gathered around him, resembled a pack of wolves, each member eyeing the others with a mixture of affection and barely concealed animosity. Prince Caius, the king's eldest son, possessed a charm that bordered on unsettling. His laughter was too loud, his compliments too profuse, his gestures too grand. It was a performance carefully crafted to mask the ambition that burned within him, an ambition that clashed directly with his father's iron grip on power. He was, in many ways, the king's reflection, but with a subtle, dangerous twist. While Theron ruled through fear, Caius planned to rule through manipulation, his smile a weapon sharper than any sword. Princess Lyra, Caius's younger sister, was a different breed altogether. She was the quiet observer, her eyes constantly assessing, her silence more potent than any outburst. She held no overt ambition for the throne, but she possessed a keen intellect and an uncanny ability to manipulate events from the shadows. She was the spider at the center of the royal web, her silken threads weaving a tapestry of intrigue, her subtle influence shaping the fates of those around her. Her silence was a chilling testament to her strategic mind, her calm a deceptive facade masking a ruthless pragmatism. She knew the game, she played it flawlessly, and her silent observation was a constant, uncomfortable presence in the palace. Their mother, Queen Isolde, was a fading echo of her former beauty. Once the undisputed queen of Viridia, her influence had waned considerably under Theron's increasingly tyrannical reign. She was a prisoner in her own gilded cage, her days filled with a suffocating routine that echoed the emptiness in her heart. Yet, even in her weakened state, she held a certain residual power. She was the queen, after all, and even a king hesitated to ignore her completely. Her words, though often carefully chosen, held a weight that her reduced status could not erase, and she quietly plotted her own course, ensuring her own survival within the volatile atmosphere of the court. She played the long game, understanding that patience could be a powerful weapon in a palace where impatience often led to a swift and brutal end. The king's court was a breeding ground for whispers and rumors. Every smile was suspect, every compliment a potential poisoned chalice. The lavish feasts were punctuated by the sharp glint of hidden daggers, the sweet music often drowned out by the whispers of plots and counterplots. Each member of the royal family, as well as the court, was entangled in a web of alliances and betrayals, their loyalties shifting with the currents of power. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions, the air heavy with the scent of fear and anticipation. In this environment, survival was a daily struggle, and only the most cunning could hope to survive the games the king played. Theron's methods were as subtle as the crimson hands, but far more personal. He didn't need secret police to eliminate his rivals. He used his own family as pawns in his deadly game. A carelessly worded letter, a misplaced jewel, a whispered rumor. These seemingly insignificant details were all carefully orchestrated to destabilize his opponents and pave the way for their downfall. He employed a network of informants, loyal servants who would readily betray their masters to earn the king's favor. The king's paranoia was almost palpable. Every member of his family lived under a constant cloud of suspicion. Their words and actions were meticulously scrutinized, their alliances constantly questioned. Even the smallest infraction could result in a swift and brutal punishment, a punishment often delivered in the dead of night, the victim vanishing without a trace. The sheer ruthlessness of it all silenced even the most rebellious members. Silence reigned supreme, and only Theron's voice resonated throughout the palace. The death of Theron's uncle, Lord Elric, was a prime example of the king's Machiavellian tactics. Officially, Elric died of a sudden illness. However, the whispers that snaked through the court painted a different picture. A carefully poisoned wine, a subtle injection of a deadly venom, a clandestine encounter resulting in a swift and silent death. No one dared to speak openly of it, lest they become the next victim. This was the price of defiance, the reality of the king's reign. The parallels to modern politics are chillingly relevant. The backstabbing, the betrayals, the ruthless pursuit of power, these are not confined to the medieval court. One only needs to look at the inner workings of political parties, the ruthless maneuvering for positions of influence, the whispering campaigns designed to destroy reputations, and the cutthroat battles for control. The same hunger for power, the same willingness to sacrifice loyalty and morality for personal gain, all played out on a modern stage with updated methods. The human cost remains the same, but the methods have advanced. The absurdity of it all lies in the futility of such actions. Theron's reign, fueled by paranoia and suspicion, ultimately destroyed the very bonds of family and loyalty that should have been his greatest strength. He succeeded in creating an atmosphere of fear and mistrust, but he also created a breeding ground for resentment and rebellion. His relentless pursuit of absolute control left him isolated, surrounded by those who feared him more than they loved him. The lavishness of the court could not mask the emptiness that was the king's soul, nor the fear that gripped his family and courtiers. The opulent chambers, the lavish feasts, the carefully crafted image of benevolent leadership, all of these were merely a mask, a facade designed to conceal the brutality and cruelty that lay at the heart of Theron's reign. The laughter and joy, once abundant in the royal court, were replaced by a pervasive silence, broken only by the occasional, chilling whisper of fear. The king's reign, therefore, serves as a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of the corrosive effects of absolute power, demonstrating how its relentless pursuit ultimately leaves a trail of destruction, destroying not only the lives of those who oppose him, but also those who are closest to him. The game, in the end, is played at a high cost, a price paid by everyone involved. The rain outside continued its relentless descent, a constant gloomy backdrop to the drama playing out within the walls of the royal palace, a mirroring of the king's own perpetually stormy internal landscape. The meticulously crafted image of King Theron, the benevolent ruler, was a masterpiece of propaganda, a carefully constructed illusion designed to mask the brutal reality of his reign. His public appearances were meticulously orchestrated spectacles, each detail calculated to project an image of strength, piety, and unwavering devotion to his people. He held court in grand halls, adorned with tapestries depicting glorious battles and pious saints, his throne a monument to his supposed divine right to rule. He was always impeccably dressed, his robes shimmering with gold and jewels, his every movement a calculated display of regal grace. His speeches, delivered in a resonant baritone voice, were filled with pious pronouncements and promises of prosperity. He spoke of his love for his people, his unwavering commitment to justice, and his deep faith in the divine right of kings. He distributed alms to the poor, attended religious ceremonies with fervent devotion, and commissioned grand public works projects designed to benefit his kingdom. These displays of benevolence were carefully documented and disseminated throughout the kingdom through royal messengers, official pronouncements, and even meticulously crafted songs and ballads that were sung by wandering minstrels. The royal court served as a powerful propaganda machine, churning out a constant stream of carefully curated information designed to shape public perception. Artists painted flattering portraits of the king, highlighting his strength and majesty, while carefully obscuring the cruelty and paranoia that simmered beneath the surface. Poets penned odes to his greatness, extolling his virtues and downplaying his flaws. Historians were carefully selected and rewarded for crafting narratives that presented the king in the most positive light possible. Dissent was swiftly and brutally suppressed. Any attempt to criticize the king or expose the true nature of his reign was met with swift and merciless retribution. Those who dared to speak against him vanished without a trace, their fate a chilling reminder of the consequences of defiance. The contrast between the king's public persona and his private life was stark. While he presented himself to the public as a pious and benevolent ruler, his private life was filled with cruelty, paranoia, and an insatiable thirst for power. He ruled through fear, silencing any opposition with brutal efficiency. His own family lived in constant fear, each member aware that a single misstep could lead to a swift and brutal end. The lavish feasts held in the royal court were punctuated by moments of tense silence, each participant carefully watching their words and actions. Theron's mastery of propaganda extended beyond the visual and verbal realm. He understood the power of spectacle and utilized it to maintain his control. Grand tournaments, lavish festivals, and elaborate religious ceremonies were meticulously staged to demonstrate his power and solidify his image in the minds of his subjects. The sheer scale and extravagance of these events served as a constant reminder of his authority, dazzling the populace and distracting them from the harsh realities of daily life under his rule. The carefully orchestrated nature of these events ensured that every aspect reinforced the image of the benevolent and powerful king. The comparison to modern politics is both striking and unsettling. The methods may have changed, but the underlying principles remain the same. Modern leaders also rely heavily on carefully crafted public images, using sophisticated techniques such as spin, social media manipulation, and meticulously orchestrated public relations campaigns to control the narrative and shape public opinion. The constant stream of carefully curated information that floods our digital age mirrors the medieval court's relentless propaganda machine. Social media platforms have replaced the royal messengers and wandering minstrels as the primary means of disseminating information, and the algorithms that govern these platforms can be just as effective, if not more so, in shaping public perception than the royal court's carefully chosen artists and poets. Modern politicians use carefully selected visuals and sound bites to project an image of strength, competence, and empathy, just as Theron did. They participate in televised debates and carefully stage public appearances to create the impression of approachability and authenticity. They utilize carefully crafted slogans and catchphrases to simplify complex issues and appeal to a wide audience, mirroring the simple, easily digested narratives pushed by Theron's court. The methods may be more sophisticated, but the underlying goal remains unchanged: to manipulate public perception and consolidate power. Moreover, the silencing of dissent is a disturbing parallel that runs through both historical and modern contexts. In Theron's time, physical violence and intimidation were the preferred methods. Today, the methods are more subtle but equally effective. Critics are labeled as extremists, their voices drowned out in a cacophony of carefully manufactured narratives. Oppositional views are dismissed as fake news or misinformation, and those who dare to challenge the established narrative face social and political ostracism. The tools may differ: imprisonment versus social media cancel culture, but the aim is the same: to silence those who dare to challenge the dominant power structure. The absurdity of Theron's reign, and indeed of any reign founded on propaganda and the cult of personality, lies in its fundamental instability. A regime built on a foundation of lies and manipulation is inherently weak and vulnerable. It relies on the continued suspension of disbelief by its subjects, a fragile condition easily shattered when the truth begins to surface, as it inevitably does. The lavish displays of wealth and power, the meticulously crafted image of a benevolent ruler, these are all superficial attempts to mask the underlying insecurities and anxieties that fuel the tyrant's lust for absolute control. Theron's obsession with controlling the narrative ultimately led to his downfall. His paranoia and suspicion created an environment of fear and mistrust that consumed his own court and ultimately eroded his authority. The carefully constructed facade that he had spent his life building crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions, revealing the ruthless and paranoid tyrant lurking beneath. His meticulously crafted public image, far from securing his power, ultimately became a liability, revealing his true nature to the very people he had attempted to deceive. His reign serves as a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of the ephemeral nature of power built on lies and the inevitably self-destructive consequences of a relentless pursuit of absolute control. The rain outside continued its relentless patter, a grim counterpoint to the gilded cage of the king's absolute, ultimately absurd reign. The relentless rain mirrored the oppressive weight of Theron's rule, years of meticulously crafted propaganda, of carefully orchestrated spectacles and lavish displays of power had failed to mask the gnawing discontent simmering beneath the surface of his kingdom. While the king's image was burnished to a gleaming perfection in official portraits and courtly ballads, the reality for his subjects was far less glamorous. Taxes were crippling, food was scarce, and the constant threat of arbitrary arrest hung heavy in the air. The whispers began subtly, a rustle in the wind carried on the backs of ravens, not quite audible, but undeniably present. Initially, these whispers were mere complaints, murmured in hushed tones in the dimly lit corners of taverns and peasant huts. Stories of vanished dissenters, of families torn apart by the king's paranoia, circulated like shadows, feeding anxieties and forging a sense of collective unease. The casual cruelty of the royal guards, the ever present surveillance of informers, created an atmosphere of pervasive fear. Yet it was this very fear that paradoxically began to weld the populace together. Shared suffering, shared oppression, forged a bond stronger than Theron's carefully constructed iron fist. A baker, known for his crusty bread and even crustier opinions, became the unlikely leader of this nascent rebellion. Old Alara, his wife, had always been known for her sharp tongue and an even sharper wit. Their tiny bakery, nestled in a narrow alleyway, had become a haven for discontent, its yeasty aroma masking the scent of growing rebellion. It was here, amidst the rising dough and the clatter of pans, that the initial meetings took place, fueled by desperation and a fierce determination to change their fate. The meetings were small at first, clandestine gatherings of a handful of brave souls. They met in hushed whispers, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight, swapping stories of oppression, sharing grievances, and slowly, tentatively, formulating plans for resistance. Their discussions were far from uniform. Some advocated for peaceful protests, others whispered of more violent action. The discussions reflected the complexities of rebellion, the diverse opinions and strategies that emerge when people rise up against oppression. It mirrored, strangely enough, the internal debates within many modern social movements, the friction and disagreement that often accompanies the quest for change. These initial meetings were more about building trust than forming solid plans. In the chilling atmosphere created by Theron, trust was as precious as bread in a famine. The discussions were cautious, each participant acutely aware of the ever-present threat of betrayal and denunciation. Yet, as weeks bled into months and the weight of shared suffering deepened, so too did the trust among the group. They shared the tales of their oppression, their anger, their fears, and in doing so, stripped themselves bare in a way that made betrayal unthinkable. The emergence of such underground networks highlights the inherent resilience of the human spirit. Throughout history, from the whispered conspiracies of the French resistance to the courageous acts of defiance in the Eastern Bloc, clandestine meetings like these have been the crucible of rebellion, forging a sense of community in the face of oppressive power. Even in the modern age, where technological tools provide a greater degree of connectivity, similar principles apply. Many social movements today rely on encrypted communication channels and decentralized networks to organize and operate, reflecting a shared need for secrecy and security. These parallels underscore the timeless nature of human resistance against tyranny. The whispers began to grow louder. The baker, initially reluctant, found himself thrust into a leadership position. He, with his years of observing the subtle shifts in the mood of his clientele, became acutely attuned to the needs and fears of his neighbors. He was, in a way, a barometer of the simmering discontent. He channeled their frustrations into a rudimentary plan, a small, almost insignificant act of defiance, a spark that might ignite a larger flame. They decided to bake a loaf of bread, not just any bread, but a loaf shaped like a crown, the king's crown. This would be their silent protest, a symbol of their defiance, their quiet rebellion against the crown. The decision was fraught with risk. Baking a loaf of bread in the shape of a crown was akin to writing a manifesto with flour and water. Yet, it encapsulated their defiance perfectly. It was a subtle act of rebellion that would be both noticeable and difficult to pinpoint as an overt expression of dissent. It was a way to express their resistance without directly confronting the king's power. Similarly, many modern forms of resistance are less overtly violent. Silent protests, boycotts, and acts of civil disobedience often serve as more effective ways of expressing dissent than direct confrontation. The night before the bake, the air crackled with a nervous energy. Old Alara's nimble fingers kneaded the dough, muttering words of defiance under her breath. The baker, his usually jovial face, etched with a mix of fear and exhilaration, meticulously shaped the dough, his hands carefully creating the intricate details of the crown. They worked in the dim light of a single candle, their shadows stretching and twisting on the walls, mimicking the precariousness of their act. The scene held a certain theatrical quality, a silent drama played out in the confines of a modest bakery. The next morning, the bread was ready. It was magnificent, a perfect replica of the king's crown, its golden brown crust shimmering under the dim light of the bakery. The aroma was irresistible, a mixture of defiance and yeast. They displayed it proudly, not to provoke direct confrontation, but to sow a seed of hope. It wasn't a declaration of war, but a silent challenge, a subtle yet meaningful act of rebellion. The impact was understated yet significant. The creation and display of the crown-shaped bread became a symbol of defiance, subtly challenging the king's authority and providing a sense of solidarity among the people. Word spread. It started with quiet whispers in the bakery and then expanded across the marketplace, to the homes, to the farms. People understood the message without a direct call to action. The shared act of baking and consuming the bread united them in an unspoken rebellion. This quiet act of defiance was not a call to arms, but a seed planted in fertile ground. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, a refusal to be silenced, even under the most oppressive conditions. The loaf of bread, seemingly innocuous, became a potent symbol of rebellion, and it subtly shifted the balance of power, foreshadowing the events to come. The reign continued, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the slow, steady buildup of rebellion, a counterpoint to the king's desperate attempt to maintain his absurd and ultimately unsustainable control. Chapter 2: The Tyrant's Downfall. The crown-shaped bread, a seemingly insignificant act of defiance, became the catalyst. It wasn't a battle cry, but a whispered promise, a silent testament to the enduring human spirit. The baker, initially a reluctant leader, found himself at the center of a burgeoning network of resistance. He wasn't a revolutionary by nature. He was simply a man who loved his wife, his craft, and his community, and he had witnessed firsthand the corrosive effect of Theron's tyranny. His bakery, once a quiet haven of flour and warmth, transformed into a clandestine meeting place. Under the guise of late night baking sessions, small groups gathered, their faces shrouded in shadow, their voices barely above a whisper. These were not grand gatherings of revolutionary leaders. They were ordinary people, burdened by hunger and fear, united by a shared desire for freedom. Each meeting was a gamble, a carefully choreographed dance between hope and terror, a constant awareness of the ever present threat of betrayal. The conversations were tense, filled with the weight of unspoken anxieties and the thrill of forbidden ideas. They debated strategies, meticulously weighing the risks and rewards of various approaches. Some favored peaceful protests, recalling past uprisings where appeals to reason and justice had occasionally succeeded. Others, hardened by years of oppression and witnessing Theron's casual cruelty, advocated for more forceful measures. The discussions reflected the inherent tension within any movement for social change, the struggle to balance pragmatism with idealism, caution with courage. The parallels to modern day political movements, the internal debates, the strategic disagreements, the constant threat of infiltration were striking. One could almost see the ghost of Occupy Wall Street, the shadow of the Arab Spring flickering in the candlelight. Their communication network was as fragile as a spider's web, relying on whispered messages, coded signals, and the unwavering loyalty of trusted friends and family. They used the ancient network of smugglers and traders, already operating in the shadows of Theron's kingdom, to transmit information and coordinate their activities. The reliance on these pre-existing networks echoed the strategies of modern resistance movements, which often leverage existing social and technological infrastructures to enhance their efficiency and security. The way these underground networks operated, decentralized, self-organizing, adapting to the ever-shifting landscape of risk, is a testament to the enduring human capacity for resilience and innovation in the face of oppression. A blacksmith whose hands were more accustomed to shaping iron than plotting rebellion created a series of coded symbols that were subtly embedded in everyday objects. A specific knot in a rope, a particular pattern etched into a wooden spoon. These seemingly insignificant details acted as secret messages, carrying critical information through the marketplace and along the country roads. The meticulous planning and execution mirrored the intricate strategies employed by the French resistance during World War II, where seemingly ordinary objects often held hidden meanings and vital information. These methods, seemingly antiquated by modern standards, were surprisingly effective and demonstrated that when resources are scarce and security is paramount, ingenuity and innovation can flourish. One of the most surprising recruits to the rebellion was a royal scribe, a man named Lucian, who had served in the king's court for over a decade. Lucian, a master of language and bureaucracy, found himself increasingly disillusioned by Theron's reign of terror. He secretly provided the resistance with critical information exposing the king's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. He would subtly alter official documents, planting crucial details that, when pieced together, revealed Theron's secret plans and precarious position. Lucian's actions are reminiscent of many whistleblowers throughout history who risked their lives to expose the truth and challenge the prevailing power structures. These actions, while fraught with peril, are vital for exposing corruption and inspiring change, mirroring contemporary efforts to expose governmental wrongdoings and corporate malfeasance. The risk was immense. Betrayal could mean torture, imprisonment, or worse. Yet, the weight of Theron's oppression, the daily injustices they witnessed, fueled their determination. They met in the dead of night, their voices barely audible above the whispers of the wind. They shared stories, fears, and hopes, forging a bond of solidarity that was stronger than any prison wall. They were not fighting for glory, but for survival, for dignity, for the chance to live free from fear. Their plans were ambitious, even audacious. They weren't merely seeking to overthrow Theron, they were seeking to fundamentally reshape the political landscape of the kingdom. Their ideas mirrored the demands of many contemporary social movements, advocating not only for immediate reforms, but also for long-term systemic change. They envisioned a kingdom where justice prevailed, where the voices of the people were heard, and where the rule of law, not the whim of a tyrant, guided the land. The parallels between their aims and the goals of modern-day political and social movements are undeniable. The rebellion was a tapestry woven from countless threads, whispered conversations, secret meetings, coded messages, acts of quiet defiance. It was a slow, patient process, a testament to the enduring power of hope and resilience. The rain continued to fall, a relentless soundtrack to their clandestine activities. Yet, despite the ever-present danger, a sense of optimism began to emerge, a quiet confidence that even against the seemingly insurmountable odds, change was possible. The whispers in the dark were growing louder, stronger, gaining momentum, a prelude to the storm that was about to break. The king's reign, built on fear and oppression, was slowly, inexorably crumbling. The foundation of his power, once seemingly unyielding, was beginning to show cracks, the first signs of a long-awaited downfall. The revolution, brewing for so long in the shadows, was beginning to make its presence known, not with a roar, but a steadily rising crescendo of determined whispers. The tide was turning. The whispers of rebellion, once confined to hushed bakeries and shadowed alleyways, began to echo within the very halls of Theron's castle. The source, surprisingly, was not a disgruntled peasant or a hardened revolutionary, but Lord Elmsworth, Theron's own Lord Chancellor and closest adviser. Elmsworth, a man whose loyalty had seemed unshakable, a man whose face had been perpetually plastered with a smile that could curdle milk, had quietly, meticulously, been dismantling Theron's reign from within. His motivations were complex, a tangled web of ambition, disillusionment, and perhaps a touch of genuine disgust. He'd served Theron for decades, witnessing firsthand the transformation from a relatively benevolent, if somewhat capricious ruler, into the tyrannical monster he'd become. The endless executions, the arbitrary decrees, the systematic dismantling of any semblance of justice. It had all taken a toll. Elmsworth, who valued order and efficiency above all else, found Theron's reign chaotic and ultimately self destructive. The kingdom was bleeding, its resources depleted, its people demoralized. Elmsworth, a master of political maneuvering, saw an opportunity not just to overthrow Theron, but to secure his own position in the ensuing power vacuum. His actions were a masterclass in calculated betrayal, a chilling example of how ambition can masquerade as principle. His method of betrayal was as subtle as a viper's strike. He didn't send dramatic missives or engage in flamboyant acts of defiance. Instead, he subtly manipulated information, leaking vital details to the rebels while simultaneously maintaining the appearance of unwavering loyalty to the king. He'd tamper with royal decrees, delaying crucial decisions or subtly altering the wording to create confusion and inefficiency. He'd accidentally misplace documents containing critical military information, allowing the rebels to anticipate Theron's movements. He played the role of a loyal advisor to perfection, all while orchestrating a slow, agonizing decline of the king's authority. The court, a viper pit of intrigue and backstabbing, became the stage for Elmsworth's masterful performance. He'd engage in seemingly innocent conversations with Theron's other advisors, subtly planting seeds of doubt about the king's judgment and sanity. He would expertly deflect accusations, skillfully shifting blame and subtly undermining the credibility of his rivals. His actions were a masterclass in political manipulation, a chilling reminder that the most dangerous weapons are often not swords and shields, but words carefully chosen and deeds subtly executed. These actions weren't dissimilar to the shadowy backroom dealings and carefully orchestrated leaks that plague modern political landscapes. One can practically hear the echoes of lobbying scandals and partisan infighting in the hushed conversations within Theron's court. The instability at the heart of Theron's court mirrored the political turmoil of many modern governments. The constant struggle for power, the shifting alliances, the backstabbing and betrayals, all played out against a backdrop of opulent excess and simmering discontent. The courtiers, driven by personal ambition and self-preservation, were like a pack of wolves, always circling, always waiting for an opportunity to strike. Elmsworth, however, was the alpha, skillfully orchestrating the chaos and using it to his advantage. The claustrophobia of the court was palpable. The ornate walls, once symbols of Theron's absolute power, now seemed to close in, their grandeur a mocking reminder of the suffocating atmosphere of fear and suspicion. The constant surveillance, the whispers in the corridors, the ever-present fear of discovery. It created a suffocating environment where trust was a luxury few could afford, and every word, every gesture carried a potential threat. One could almost feel the pressure of the gilded cage, the weight of expectation, the constant need to maintain the facade of loyalty, even as dark plans were being hatched in the shadows. One particular incident stands out: a seemingly insignificant disagreement over the allocation of funds for a new royal hunting lodge. To the casual observer, it would appear as just another squabble amongst power-hungry courtiers. But Elmsworth, ever the master of manipulation, cleverly used it to sow discord amongst Theron's advisors. He subtly highlighted Theron's increasing extravagance and irrationality, painting a picture of a ruler losing his grip on reality. He played on the advisor's self interest and ambition, subtly suggesting that Theron's impending downfall was inevitable, and that aligning with him would guarantee their own survival and future prosperity. The political gamesmanship played out in the opulent halls of the castle was remarkably similar to those seen in contemporary political arenas, mirroring the tactics of campaign managers and spin doctors in their attempts to influence public opinion and gain an advantage. Elmsworth's actions had a domino effect. Other courtiers, sensing the shift in power dynamics, began to quietly realign their allegiances. Some were motivated by genuine disillusionment with Theron's tyranny. Others were simply looking for ways to protect themselves in the approaching storm. The court, once a monolithic symbol of the king's authority, began to fracture, its unity replaced by a growing sense of uncertainty and fear. The information Elmsworth provided to the rebels was invaluable. He detailed Theron's military strategies, the locations of his hidden treasuries, and most importantly, his weaknesses, his paranoia, his vanity, his increasingly erratic behavior. Armed with this intelligence, the rebels were able to launch a coordinated assault, striking at the heart of Theron's power with surgical precision. The parallel to contemporary whistleblowers, who risk their careers and lives to expose corruption and tyranny, is striking. Both Elmsworth and these modern counterparts were driven by a mixture of self-interest, moral outrage, and a desire for systemic change. The betrayal at court was not a single act of treachery, but a carefully orchestrated symphony of deceit, a slow erosion of trust and loyalty. It was a slow-burning fuse, ignited by Elmsworth's calculated maneuvers and fueled by the simmering discontent within the king's inner circle. The parallels to modern political betrayals, the sudden shifts in allegiance, the clandestine meetings, the leaked information, all echoed in the claustrophobic atmosphere of Theron's court. The intricate dance of power and betrayal, the shifting alliances and hidden agendas, painted a picture of political maneuvering that felt surprisingly familiar, despite the centuries that separated these events from the current political climate. History, it seemed, had a penchant for repeating itself, albeit with increasingly opulent costumes. The air in the castle was thick with tension, the silence punctuated by the occasional nervous cough or the rustle of silk. The loyalties of even Theron's most trusted guards began to waver, fueled by whispers of Elmsworth's treachery and the impending downfall of the king. Theron, oblivious to the extent of the betrayal, remained locked in his world of paranoia and self-delusion, a tragic figure whose reign of terror was about to meet its inevitable end. The irony was not lost on Elmsworth. The tyrant, so used to wielding absolute power, was about to become a victim of his own cruelty. His downfall, orchestrated by the very system he designed to maintain his control. The kingdom held its breath, waiting for the final act in this tragic play of power, betrayal, and ultimately revolution. The seeds of change, planted in the darkness, were finally ready to bloom, ushering in a new era, hopefully one less reliant on crown-shaped bread as a symbol of resistance. The cobblestones of the capital city, once gleaming under the oppressive weight of Theron's reign, now ran red with blood. The storm, long brewing beneath the surface of seemingly unwavering loyalty, had finally broken. The rebellion, initially a hushed whisper, had erupted into a furious roar, a maelstrom of fire and fury that swept through the streets like a wildfire. The air crackled with the energy of desperate men and women, their faces grim, their eyes blazing with a fierce determination that belied their ragged clothing and makeshift weapons. Picks and shovels, once used to till the earth, now served as bludgeons against the king's soldiers. Farm implements were repurposed as lances, and even kitchen knives became instruments of rebellion. It was a chaotic, brutal ballet of desperation, a testament to the human capacity for both profound resilience and horrifying violence. The echoes of this rebellion, it must be said, resonate through history and find themselves mirrored in countless uprisings across the globe. From the French Revolution to the Arab Spring, the struggles for liberation are often characterized by this raw, visceral energy. Theron's loyalist forces, clad in gleaming armor, initially met the rebellion with cold efficiency. They formed tight formations, their swords a shimmering wall against the tide of enraged citizens. The clash of steel against makeshift weapons was a discordant symphony of violence, a horrifying counterpoint to the screams of the injured and dying. Yet, even with their superior training and weaponry, the king's army struggled to contain the uprising. The rebels, fueled by years of oppression, fought with a ferocity that surprised even their own leaders. They were not merely fighting for their lives, they were fighting for their very dignity, a dignity Theron had systematically stripped away. The city's narrow streets became battlefields, each alleyway and courtyard a scene of brutal struggle. Buildings, once symbols of Theron's power, were now barricades, their stones stained crimson with spilled blood. The rebels, outnumbered and outgunned, used the city's labyrinthine layout to their advantage, launching swift ambushes and disappearing into the shadows. Their knowledge of the terrain turned the familiar streets into a deadly trap for Theron's forces, highlighting the critical role of guerrilla tactics in countless uprisings. This aspect of the revolution resonates with the strategies employed in numerous modern conflicts, demonstrating the crucial importance of asymmetrical warfare when facing a superior military force. The conflict was not merely a clash of armies, it was a clash of ideologies, a brutal struggle between tyranny and freedom. It is difficult to write of this conflict without resorting to romanticized narratives of heroic resistance. The reality was far messier, far more complex. It was a brutal fight for survival, a chaotic maelstrom of desperation and violence. Amongst the bravery and sacrifice were acts of cowardice, betrayal, and opportunistic violence. This is, after all, the true face of revolution. Amidst the chaos, however, moments of quiet heroism emerged. A baker, his hands usually covered in flour, now wielded a bread knife with deadly accuracy. A seamstress, her nimble fingers accustomed to needle and thread, now skillfully tended to the wounds of her fellow rebels. A humble scholar, normally confined to the dusty pages of ancient texts, emerged as a tactical genius, skillfully guiding the rebels through the city's treacherous streets. Their actions remind us that courage isn't always found on the battlefield or in moments of glorious confrontation. It often resides in the quiet acts of defiance and resilience of ordinary individuals. Theron, watching the unfolding chaos from his castle, was a picture of impotent rage. His carefully constructed world of power and control was crumbling before his eyes, replaced by the anarchy he had so diligently sought to crush. His attempts to regain control were futile. His orders, once absolute, were now met with defiance, even from those who previously swore their unquestioning loyalty. He had created a kingdom built on fear, a foundation which was now demonstrably insufficient. It serves as a potent reminder that even the most absolute power is fragile and ephemeral, often built on a house of cards ready to be swept away by the unpredictable winds of rebellion. The desperation of the rebels wasn't just a matter of fighting for survival. It was a visceral rejection of the dehumanizing aspects of Theron's reign. Years of oppression, of arbitrary decrees, and constant surveillance had fueled a simmering rage that had now exploded into a full-scale revolt. The rebels fought not only for their physical freedom, but also for their dignity, their right to self-determination, their claim to a future free from tyranny. This echoes the struggles of countless revolutionaries across history and the present day, demonstrating the enduring human desire for autonomy and self-governance. The fighting continued for days, a relentless struggle for every inch of territory. The streets were littered with the dead and wounded, a stark reminder of the human cost of revolution. The city, once a symbol of Theron's power, was now a wasteland, ravaged by fire and violence. The air hung heavy with the stench of blood and burning wood, a macabre testament to the price of freedom. Lord Elmsworth, observing the chaos from a hidden vantage point, felt a peculiar mix of satisfaction and unease. His meticulous planning had paid off. The king's reign was collapsing, but the violence and disorder were far more extensive than he had anticipated. The rebellion, once a carefully orchestrated maneuver, had taken on a life of its own. The human cost of this revolution was shocking, a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of even the most meticulously crafted plans. Helmsworth's actions mirror the ethical dilemmas faced by many modern-day revolutionaries, raising questions about the cost of freedom and the limits of justifiable violence. The unintended consequences and unpredictable spirals of violence are a common theme in many revolutions throughout history. The final assault on the castle was a whirlwind of violence. The rebels, fueled by adrenaline and a sense of impending victory, stormed the gates, their numbers seemingly limitless. Theron's guards, once so proud and confident, were overwhelmed, their discipline shattered by the sheer force of the uprising. The ensuing battle within the castle walls was brutal, a desperate struggle for survival. Yet, despite the desperate struggle, there remained a stark sense of inevitability surrounding Theron's downfall. His tyrannical reign, built on oppression and fear, had finally met its match, not just in the organized rebellion, but in the collective rage of an oppressed people. As Theron's reign crumbled, the parallels to contemporary political upheavals became even more stark. The sudden shifts in allegiance, the backroom deals, the leaked information, all mirrored the complexities of modern political revolutions, highlighting the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and the resilient pursuit of freedom. History, it seemed, had once again repeated itself, proving that the struggle for power and the price of freedom remain timeless themes in the ever evolving narrative of human civilization. The storm had broken, leaving behind a city scarred by violence, but also pregnant with the potential for a new beginning. A beginning that, like all new beginnings, remained uncertain, unstable, and fraught with the potential for its own peculiar forms of cruelty and oppression. The future, like the aftermath of any revolution, remained unwritten. The opulent chambers of Theron's palace, once symbols of his absolute power, were now eerily silent, the gilded cages of his tyranny empty. The echoes of the battle that raged outside barely penetrated the thick castle walls, replaced by an unnerving quietude that spoke volumes of the king's imminent demise. He stood before a full-length mirror, the reflection staring back a grotesque parody of the man he once was, a man who believed himself invincible, a god among mortals. The mirror, once a symbol of his self-obsession, now showed a haggard, defeated figure, his usually immaculate attire rumpled and stained with the grime of desperation. The regal purple of his robe was now dull, smudged with the residue of spilled wine, and more disturbingly, blood. His hands, once accustomed to wielding power with effortless grace, trembled slightly as he reached for a goblet of wine, the liquid sloshing precariously within. He took a long, slow sip, the wine doing little to soothe the churning anxiety within him. The rhythmic pounding of the rebels' siege on the castle walls served as a gruesome, yet strangely hypnotic soundtrack to his final moments. He imagined the faces of those rebels, the baker, the seamstress, the scholar, all fueled by the same fire that had consumed his kingdom. It was a fire he had himself kindled, years of oppression, igniting the embers of a revolution that was now consuming him. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound devoid of humor. It was, he had to admit, a darkly ironic end, a king consumed by the flames of his own making. The parallels to modern political narratives, where even the most meticulously crafted power structures can crumble under the weight of popular discontent, were impossible to ignore. His loyal advisers, once a throng of sycophants eager to please their sovereign, were now scattered, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and regret. Some had already deserted him, seeking to save their own necks in the impending collapse. Others huddled together in nervous whispers, their assurances hollow and unconvincing. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand, a gesture that lacked its former imperiousness. Their desperate attempts to offer counsel, to forge a path towards a miraculous escape, were as futile as their prior attempts to prop up his crumbling regime. It was a poignant display of the transient nature of loyalty, a reminder that even the most fiercely loyal subjects will abandon ship when the storm rages too furiously. This was, after all, the true cost of power built upon fear. He moved to the window, gazing upon the raging conflict in the streets below. The fires, once carefully controlled bonfires celebrating his victories, were now uncontrolled infernos, consuming the city in a chaotic dance of destruction. He had prided himself on his ability to manipulate events, to control the narrative, to project an image of strength and invincibility. Yet here he was, powerless, a spectator to the destruction of his own creation. The rebellion, much like modern societal upheavals, had surpassed his ability to manage it, highlighting the limitations of control even for the most ruthless and cunning leader. The sounds of battle intensified. The rhythmic clang of steel on steel, the guttural cries of the dying, the thunderous boom of battering rams against the castle gates. It was a cacophony of death, a morbid symphony playing out his final act. He felt a strange sense of detachment, watching the chaos unfold as if it were a play on a grand stage, the ultimate tragedy of a tyrannical king. He thought of the countless autocrats who met similar ends: Caligula, Nero, Ivan the Terrible, their names etched in history as cautionary tales of unchecked power. History, he realized, was not kind to tyrants. Modern parallels readily sprung to mind: the toppling of dictators, the swift dismantling of carefully constructed empires, and the bitter irony that such leaders often end up facing their subjects' wrath as the final act of their reign. The hammering on the gates grew louder, more insistent. He knew the end was near. There were no more cards up his sleeve, no more desperate ploys to cling to his diminishing power. His kingdom, built on the foundations of fear, had crumbled. The rebels, no longer afraid, were relentless in their pursuit of justice. Their fury was palpable, their desire for retribution immense. He turned away from the window, his gaze falling upon a small, unassuming painting hanging on the wall, a portrait of his younger self, a boy with bright, hopeful eyes. The boy in the painting, he realized, had never existed. It had always been a performance, a carefully crafted persona designed to mask the ruthlessness and cruelty hidden beneath. His reflection in the mirror confirmed this. The boy was gone. Only the tyrant remained, and his time was at an end. The final assault began. The rebels breached the walls, pouring into the palace, their rage a tidal wave that swept away everything in its path. Theron made no attempt to fight. He stood there, almost passively, as his guards fell around him, their swords useless against the overwhelming number of his enraged subjects. The contrast between the once formidable army and the now desperate, scattered remnants was jarring. It was a striking visual representation of how quickly power can dissipate, how easily an empire can crumble when the foundations is built on sand. The end came swiftly. A rebel, his face obscured by the smoke and dust of the battle, plunged a dagger into Theron's heart. The king collapsed to the floor, his reign abruptly and violently concluded. The silence that followed was even more unnerving than the chaos that had preceded it. The palace, once a symbol of his absolute power, was now silent and empty. His legacy, his tyranny, reduced to a silent whisper in the vast annals of history. It was a stark reminder that even the most powerful monarchs are mortal, their power ultimately ephemeral, and their tyranny always destined to meet its inevitable end. The parallel between Theron's demise and the countless historical and contemporary instances of autocratic failures served to underscore the universal truth. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and its inevitable downfall is a testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit and the timeless pursuit of justice. The empty throne room stood as a monument not to Theron's power, but to the fragility of tyranny and the ever present possibility of its overthrow. The echoes of his screams, even as they were swallowed by the shouts of the victorious rebels, served as a haunting reminder that the pursuit of absolute power is invariably a path to ruin. The dust settled, revealing a city scarred but not broken. The opulent palace, once a symbol of Theron's tyrannical reign, stood defiled, its gilded cages ripped open, its once immaculate floors stained crimson. The air, thick with the stench of smoke and decay, still carried the faint echo of battle cries, a morbid lullaby to the city's wounded soul. Yet, amidst the rubble and despair, a fragile hope flickered, the hope of a nation rebuilding itself from the ashes of tyranny. The immediate task was one of survival. The city's infrastructure lay in ruins. Homes were destroyed, and essential services were crippled. The rebels, now the unlikely saviors of the kingdom, found themselves thrust into the role of governing a nation they had just liberated. Their experience lay primarily in rebellion, not governance. The transition from armed struggle to peaceful administration was fraught with challenges, a testament to the complexity of revolution's aftermath. This wasn't a simple swap of one regime for another. It was a laborious process of dismantling the old order, brick by bloody brick, and constructing a new one from the very ground up. It was a daunting task that demanded not only bravery, but also a degree of statesmanship they hadn't anticipated. One of the immediate concerns was the provision of food and shelter for the displaced populace. The king's granaries, once overflowing with the spoils of his oppressive regime, were mysteriously empty, a stark reminder of Theron's corruption. The rebels, however, drawing on the very spirit that fueled their uprising, resorted to mutual aid and resource sharing. Neighbors helped neighbors, sharing meager rations and offering shelter in whatever makeshift accommodations they could find. It was a display of solidarity that underscored the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to the fact that even in the depths of despair, humanity's capacity for compassion could bloom, a stark contrast to the systematic cruelty of Theron's reign. This grassroots organization, while far from perfect, hinted at a nascent social contract founded not on fear, but on mutual support. The question of justice proved even more complex. The thirst for revenge was palpable. Many yearned for retribution against Theron's collaborators and enforcers. However, the rebels, now in a position of authority, understood the need for a more considered approach. While dispensing swift justice to those guilty of heinous crimes was imperative, they also recognized the danger of descending into the very tyranny they had overthrown. The establishment of a fair and impartial judicial system became a cornerstone of their rebuilding efforts. This mirrored contemporary struggles for transitional justice, highlighting the enduring challenge of balancing accountability with the need for societal healing. The line between righteous retribution and vengeful tyranny was a delicate one to walk, one that required a degree of wisdom and restraint that tested the very fabric of their new government. The process of reconciliation proved even more daunting. The kingdom was deeply divided, fractured by years of oppression and mistrust. The wounds inflicted by Theron's regime ran deep, poisoning social relationships and fueling resentments that spanned generations. The leaders understood that mere political change was insufficient. True reconciliation required a fundamental shift in social attitudes and beliefs. This presented them with a challenge that extended beyond simple legislation and required a concerted effort to foster dialogue, understanding, and empathy across the divides that had been carved into the nation's soul. The parallel here to contemporary efforts to address historical injustices and societal divisions is strikingly clear, suggesting that the challenges of rebuilding a nation after tyranny are timeless. Education became a crucial pillar in this effort. Theron had systematically suppressed learning and critical thought, maintaining control by keeping his subjects ignorant and passive. The rebels, therefore, made education a priority, establishing schools and libraries, fostering a culture of critical thinking and intellectual freedom. The focus shifted from blind obedience to informed participation. This mirrored the role education plays in building strong, resilient democracies in the modern world, again demonstrating the enduring relevance of these challenges. The act of empowering individuals through education was viewed as a crucial step towards a sustainable and just society. The economic landscape also required a significant overhaul. Theron's economic policies had served to concentrate wealth in the hands of a select few, creating vast inequality and fostering resentment. The rebels, drawing inspiration from their own experiences, implemented policies aimed at promoting economic justice, redistribution of resources, and support for small businesses. The transition to a more equitable economic system was a complex and gradual process, requiring careful planning and collaboration between the different segments of society. This process mirrors the ongoing efforts in various countries to address income inequality and create a more just and sustainable economic system. The challenge of balancing immediate needs with long-term economic sustainability echoed the complexities faced by modern post-conflict societies attempting to rebuild their economies. The task of rebuilding a nation shattered by tyranny was not merely a physical one, it was a deeply emotional and psychological undertaking. It demanded not only the reconstruction of buildings and institutions, but also the healing of wounds inflicted on the collective psyche. The process was slow, fraught with setbacks and disagreements, but it was a testament to the enduring strength and resilience of the human spirit. The rebels, once fierce warriors, now found themselves grappling with the complexities of governance, justice, and reconciliation. They understood that their victory was not just a military one, it was a social and moral victory as well, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to rise from the ashes of tyranny and build a better future. The echoes of Theron's tyranny still resonated, a reminder of the fragility of peace and the constant vigilance required to safeguard freedom. But the quiet determination of the people, their commitment to building a more just and equitable society, offered a glimmer of hope, a beacon in the darkness, promising a brighter future, even as the nation grappled with the long and arduous process of healing. The journey toward a truly just society, the rebels understood, was a marathon, not a sprint. Their commitment to this long-term effort served as a potent reminder that even in the face of daunting challenges, the pursuit of a better future remains worth fighting for. The seeds of a new era were sown, nourished by the hope of a nation reborn. Chapter 3: Echoes of Tyranny. The celebrations were muted, a thin veneer of joy thinly spread over a populace still trembling. The toppling of Theron's statue, a moment anticipated with ecstatic fervor, had felt strangely anticlimactic. The cheers were punctuated by nervous glances, hushed whispers, and the chilling silence of ingrained fear. The tyrant was gone, but his ghost lingered, a spectral presence in the empty streets, in the haunted eyes of the citizenry. The revolution had won, but victory tasted like ash. The immediate aftermath of Theron's reign wasn't simply about rebuilding shattered infrastructure, it was about rebuilding shattered minds. The years of systematic terror hadn't merely left physical scars, they had carved deep trenches in the collective psyche. The most profound damage wasn't the rubble in the marketplace, but the silence in the homes, the silence born of a fear so deeply ingrained it had become second nature. People whispered their anxieties, their conversations laced with caution, their laughter tinged with apprehension. Even seemingly minor interactions were fraught with tension. A misplaced glance, an accidental touch, these could trigger flashbacks of Theron's secret police, the ever-present shadow of their informants. Suspicion, like a pernicious weed, had taken root in the very fabric of society. Neighbors eyed each other with a wariness that transcended simple caution, a residue of the forced denunciations that had characterized Theron's reign. Trust, the bedrock of any healthy society, had been systematically eroded, leaving behind only a wasteland of mistrust and paranoia. The new government, grappling with the immediate practicalities of governing, initially underestimated the depth of this psychological trauma. Their efforts focused on tangible reforms, food distribution, infrastructure projects, establishing a rudimentary justice system. But these efforts, though crucial, failed to address the invisible wounds that festered beneath the surface. The physical scars might heal, but the psychological wounds, like phantom limbs, continued to ache, a constant reminder of the past. One might compare this to a battlefield where the immediate casualties are obvious, the dead and the wounded, but there are also the unseen casualties, the soldiers suffering from PTSD, plagued by nightmares and flashbacks, unable to function in normal society. Theron's reign was the ultimate battlefield, and the populace had collectively suffered a form of mass psychological trauma. The victory parade felt less like a celebration and more like a military hospital, where the outward signs of healing masked the inner wounds that would take years, perhaps generations, to mend. The attempts at reconciliation were hamstrung by this pervasive fear. The government's efforts to foster open dialogue and community building were met with hesitant participation. Many citizens, scarred by past betrayals, were reluctant to trust anyone, even those who were fighting for their liberation. The fear of speaking openly, of expressing dissent, was far more potent than the initial fear of the tyrant himself. The silence, a defense mechanism honed over years of oppression, now served as a barrier to healing. This wasn't simply a matter of overcoming fear. It was a matter of overcoming a deeply ingrained culture of silence, a culture where open dissent was punishable by death and where survival depended on absolute conformity. Breaking that cycle required a profound shift in mindset, a societal rehabilitation project of unprecedented scale. The government's efforts to promote education were a step in the right direction, aiming to empower individuals with critical thinking skills and a sense of civic duty. But even the schools felt like a battleground, where the insidious whispers of fear continued to echo in the hushed classrooms, and the lessons on freedom felt strangely hollow against the backdrop of the pervasive unease. The pervasive fear also impacted the legal system. While the new government tried to establish a fair and impartial judicial process, many citizens were reluctant to participate, even when they were victims of crime. The lingering fear of betrayal, of being targeted for speaking out, resulted in many crimes going unreported, and the shadow of the past continuing to engulf the present. The parallels to contemporary political situations are strikingly apparent. Authoritarian regimes, whether past or present, often leave behind a legacy of fear that extends far beyond their tenure. The suppression of free speech, the intimidation of dissenters, the creation of a climate of fear, these are all tools used by tyrants to maintain power. The aftermath of such regimes frequently involves a long and arduous process of healing, both individually and collectively. The challenge of rebuilding trust, of fostering open dialogue, of addressing the deep-seated psychological trauma, these are challenges that modern societies continue to grapple with in the wake of conflict, oppression, and political turmoil. The economic recovery, too, was hampered by this lingering fear. Theron's economic policies had resulted in extreme inequality, and even with new policies promoting fairness, the pervasive fear of economic uncertainty lingered. The memory of arbitrary confiscations and forced labor led to hesitancy in investment and entrepreneurship. People were hesitant to risk their meager savings, haunted by the specter of sudden and unjust seizure of their property. In essence, the liberation from Theron's rule wasn't the end of the battle, it was merely a change of battlefield. The fight shifted from the physical realm to the psychological one, a silent war waged in the minds of the populace, a war for their very sense of safety and security. The new government faced a daunting task, not merely the building of bridges and roads, but the building of bridges across the chasm of fear that separated individuals, communities, and the nation itself. The legacy of Theron's tyranny proved far more enduring than his physical reign, a stark reminder that the wounds of oppression heal slowly and the fight for freedom extends beyond the battlefield. The echoes of fear, like the whispers of ghosts, haunted the newly liberated land, a constant reminder of the price of tyranny and the long road to healing and true freedom. The road to recovery was long and arduous, filled with setbacks and challenges, but the unwavering determination of the people, a slow and steady burning ember of hope, illuminated the path forward, promising a future where the whispers of fear would eventually be replaced by the voices of a free people. The initial euphoria of Theron's downfall quickly faded, replaced by the stark realities of governance in a society traumatized by decades of oppression. The new regime, composed largely of idealistic revolutionaries and pragmatic administrators, found themselves navigating a minefield of competing interests and deeply ingrained fears. Their initial attempts at establishing a just and equitable society were hampered by the very psychological wounds they were trying to heal. The promise of a swift transition to democracy proved naive. The infrastructure of tyranny, the network of informants and collaborators, remained deeply embedded within the societal fabric. While Theron's secret police had been dismantled, the fear they instilled persisted, a chilling legacy that poisoned even the most well intentioned reforms. The new government struggled to effectively root out Theron's loyalists, who continued to operate in the shadows, undermining the nascent democratic structures. Rumors of conspiracies and clandestine meetings fueled a climate of suspicion, hindering the government's efforts to build trust. The whispers of dissent, once met with swift and brutal punishment, now carried a new and unsettling weight. The ghost of Theron's regime haunted the halls of power, chilling the fledgling government's attempts at open discourse and free expression. The complexities of establishing a fair legal system in a society steeped in fear proved immense. The old courts, symbols of Theron's arbitrary justice, were largely discredited, yet the new judicial system lacked the experience and the public trust to replace them. Witnesses were hesitant to testify, fearing reprisals from Theron's remaining supporters, or simply unable to shake off the years of learned silence and ingrained self preservation. Justice, it seemed, had become a phantom limb, the ache of its absence almost more painful than the wounds of the past. Furthermore, the economic landscape was a wasteland. Theron's economic policies, designed to enrich himself and his cronies, had crippled the nation. The new government inherited a bankrupt treasury, crumbling infrastructure, and a population teetering on the brink of starvation. The immediate priority became alleviating the immediate suffering, but the long-term solutions faced insurmountable obstacles. The shadow of Theron's economic policies lingered, creating a climate of uncertainty that stifled investment and entrepreneurship. The people, wary of further economic shocks, hoarded what little they had, distrustful of any promises of prosperity from a government that had only just seized power. The educational system, another crucial pillar of a functioning democracy, needed a complete overhaul. Theron's regime had used the schools to indoctrinate the populace, shaping young minds to accept tyranny as the natural order. The new government aimed to reverse this damage, but the challenge proved monumental. The teachers, many of whom had been complicit in the regime's propaganda, were difficult to replace, and even those who opposed Theron were often scarred by years of self-censorship. Introducing critical thinking and critical analysis in such an environment was a risky venture, given that critical thinking is the exact opposite of what Theron had nurtured for decades. The fledgling democracy also faced the challenges of internal division. The revolutionary factions, united in their opposition to Theron, now struggled to agree on the vision for the future. Political infighting, rife with accusations of betrayal and double dealing, threatened to derail the fragile progress. The echoes of Theron's reign, it seemed, had not only poisoned the minds of the citizenry, but had also fractured the ability of the revolutionaries to govern themselves. Adding to their woes, the international community remained largely ambivalent. Some nations reluctant to engage with a government that had emerged from such upheaval, others actively seeking to exploit the nation's instability for their own gain. The new government faced immense pressure to prove its legitimacy and stability, a task made exponentially more difficult by the internal divisions and enduring trauma that plagued the nation. The parallels to contemporary political landscapes were unnerving. The rise of populist leaders, the erosion of democratic norms, the spread of misinformation, these were all grim reminders of the enduring fragility of freedom and the insidious nature of tyranny. History, it seemed, was repeating itself, albeit with a modern veneer. The seemingly insurmountable challenges faced by the new regime highlighted the fragility of democracy and the enduring legacy of oppression, reminding us that the fight for freedom is a constant, often grueling struggle, a struggle that extends far beyond the overthrow of a single tyrant. The process of national reconciliation was slow and painful. Attempts at truths and reconciliation commissions were met with skepticism, even hostility. Many were reluctant to recount their experiences, haunted by the fear of further persecution or the simple inability to articulate the profound trauma they had endured. The trauma was not just individual, but collective, a societal wound that ran deep. The wounds of oppression didn't just affect individuals, they affected families, communities, and the nation as a whole. The economic recovery proved equally arduous. The new government implemented ambitious reforms aimed at promoting economic growth and social justice, but the legacy of Theron's mismanagement lingered. Investors were hesitant, fearful of a return to the unpredictable and brutal conditions of the past. People lived hand to mouth, their savings depleted, and their trust in any form of economic stability shattered. The seeds of economic prosperity were sown, but the harvest remained distant, a testament to the long-term effects of tyranny. The new government also grappled with the issue of transitional justice. The question of how to deal with Theron's collaborators and supporters was a thorny issue, dividing the nation. Some advocated for harsh punishments, demanding retribution for past atrocities, while others argued for forgiveness and reconciliation. The lack of a clear consensus further destabilized the political landscape, creating fertile ground for future conflict. A delicate balance was needed to ensure justice without plunging the nation back into the cycle of violence and oppression. Beyond the immediate challenges of governance, the new regime faced the long-term project of rebuilding trust and fostering a culture of open dialogue and participation. The legacy of fear, the culture of silence, were deeply ingrained, requiring sustained efforts to overcome. The new government worked tirelessly to promote education, encouraging critical thinking and responsible citizenship, yet the shadow of the past hung heavy over everything. One of the biggest hurdles was the widespread distrust of authority. The people had learned to mistrust any institution, any authority figure, and the new government struggled to earn the public's trust. It was a monumental task, requiring not just words, but demonstrable actions to demonstrate their commitment to justice and transparency. It was an uphill battle, a slow and painstaking effort to rebuild the foundations of a society damaged by decades of oppression. The future of the new order remained uncertain. The challenges were immense, the road ahead long and arduous. Yet, the glimmer of hope that had ignited during the revolution refused to be extinguished. The embers of resistance carefully fanned by the new regime, represented a determined commitment to a future where freedom, justice, and equality were not merely ideals, but lived realities. The fight for a truly just and stable society had only just begun. A marathon, not a sprint, toward a future where the echoes of tyranny would finally be silenced by the resounding voices of a free people. The slow, agonizing process of rebuilding a nation shattered by decades of tyranny proved far more challenging than the initial overthrow of Theranon. The revolution, initially a glorious burst of defiance, had given way to the tedious, often demoralizing work of nation building. The euphoria of liberation had been short lived, quickly replaced by the stark realities of governance in a society deeply scarred by fear and oppression. It was a sobering lesson in the enduring nature of power structures, a testament to the resilience of entrenched systems and the adaptability of those who sought to maintain control, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The parallels between Theron's regime and contemporary political machinations were chillingly obvious. The manipulation of information, the cultivation of a cult of personality, the systematic dismantling of opposition, these weren't merely historical anomalies. They were recurring themes in the ongoing struggle for democratic governance. The ease with which Theron had manipulated the populace, exploiting their anxieties and insecurities to consolidate his power, served as a cautionary tale for any aspiring leader, a stark reminder that even the most democratic systems could be undermined by demagoguery and the calculated exploitation of fear. The modern world, cloaked in the veneer of technological advancement, was surprisingly susceptible to the same insidious tactics employed by medieval tyrants. One only needed to look at the rise of populist leaders across the globe, individuals who capitalized on societal divisions and economic anxieties to consolidate power, to see the enduring legacy of Theron's methods. Their rhetorical flourishes, their blatant disregard for established norms and institutions, echoed the tactics of centuries past. The subtle art of gaslighting, of twisting narratives to suit their own ends, mirrored the techniques employed by Theron and his henchmen. The manipulation of media, the weaponization of social platforms to spread misinformation and sow discord, these were all eerily familiar tactics, updated for the digital age. The enduring human capacity for both cruelty and hypocrisy, it seemed, transcended time and place. The newly established government found itself grappling with the intricate web of Theron's legacy. The judiciary, crippled by decades of corruption and intimidation, struggled to provide justice. Witnesses were reluctant to testify, fearing reprisals, or simply unable to overcome the ingrained fear that had become second nature during Theron's rule. The slow pace of justice fueled a sense of disillusionment, allowing Theron's loyalists to exploit the power vacuum, perpetuating the cycle of fear and intimidation. The whispers of conspiracy continued, undermining the fragile trust that the new government desperately tried to cultivate. The shadows of the past extended their reach into every facet of daily life. Economic recovery proved to be another monumental task. Theron's kleptocracy had left the nation bankrupt, its infrastructure in ruins, its population starving. The initial relief efforts, while essential, merely scratched the surface of a deeply entrenched economic crisis. The new government's attempts to implement market based reforms were often hampered by the lingering distrust of institutions, the pervasive sense of insecurity, and the lack of investment. The memories of economic hardship, the lingering trauma of starvation and deprivation weighed heavily on the psyche of the population, hindering the economic recovery. Apathy, born of despair, proved to be as crippling as any economic policy. The process of national reconciliation was equally slow and torturous. The Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, intended to address past atrocities and foster healing, were met with widespread skepticism and even hostility. Many victims of Theron's regime were reluctant to recount their experiences, haunted by the fear of retribution or simply overwhelmed by the trauma they had endured. The memories, deeply embedded in the collective consciousness, acted as a constant reminder of the brutality and injustice of the past. The weight of collective trauma was an invisible force, hindering the healing process and poisoning the relationships between former oppressors and the oppressed. Furthermore, the international community's response to the nation's upheaval was a mixed bag. Some nations, wary of engaging with a newly established government, remained hesitant to provide aid or support. Others saw the opportunity for political or economic gain, exploiting the nation's instability for their own purposes. This lack of consistent support compounded the internal challenges facing the government. It created a climate of uncertainty and fueled internal power struggles, hindering the progress towards stability and prosperity. The challenge of transitional justice proved immensely complex. The question of how to deal with Theron's collaborators, those who had participated in his atrocities or profited from his regime, was a highly divisive issue, splitting the nation into warring factions. Some advocated for harsh retribution, demanding justice for past crimes. Others argued for forgiveness and reconciliation, suggesting that focusing on retribution would only prolong the cycle of violence and division. The lack of a cohesive strategy for addressing the past and bringing those who committed crimes against humanity to justice created a festering wound within the nation, hindering the process of moving forward. The long-term project of rebuilding trust and fostering a culture of open dialogue and participation proved to be the greatest challenge. Decades of oppression had created a deeply ingrained culture of silence and fear. The simple act of speaking freely, of expressing dissent, was a dawning prospect for many, a testament to the insidious nature of tyranny. The new government's efforts to promote education and critical thinking were hampered by the lingering effects of indoctrination and the lack of resources. The task was not simply to teach new information, it was to fundamentally reshape the very way the population engaged with ideas and authority. The parallels between the post-Theron era and contemporary political landscapes remain striking. The rise of populism, the erosion of democratic norms, the proliferation of misinformation, all echoed the tactics of Theron's regime. The enduring fragility of democracy, the constant struggle against the abuse of power, stood as a testament to the cyclical nature of history. The struggle for freedom is a constant vigilance, a marathon against the relentless tide of authoritarianism. It is a battle fought not just on battlefields, but in boardrooms, legislative chambers, and the digital sphere. The fight against tyranny, it seemed, was far from over. It was a ceaseless, generation spanning conflict against the insidious human capacity for cruelty and the enduring allure of absolute power. The echoes of Theron's reign served as a chilling reminder that freedom, once lost, is never easily regained, and vigilance against the abuse of power must remain a constant, unwavering commitment. The lessons learned from Theron's downfall, though painful, were essential to safeguarding the future, ensuring that history's darkest chapters would not be repeated. The chilling resonance of Theron's reign extends far beyond the immediate aftermath of his downfall. The methods he employed to maintain power, while seemingly archaic, find disturbingly familiar echoes in the political landscape of the modern world. It's a testament to the enduring human capacity for manipulation and the cyclical nature of power dynamics, a grim joke played out across centuries. Consider, for instance, the sophisticated propaganda machine Theron constructed. His court poets crafted flattering verses, portraying him as a benevolent ruler, a shepherd guiding his flock. His scribes meticulously crafted official documents of obscuring inconvenient truths and exaggerating his accomplishments. This carefully orchestrated image-building campaign, while crude by modern standards, bears a striking resemblance to the sophisticated disinformation campaigns that plague contemporary politics. The relentless stream of carefully curated news, the strategic deployment of social media bots, the use of inflammatory language to sow discord, these are all echoes of Theron's media manipulation, adapted for the digital age. The subtle art of gaslighting, of twisting narratives to suit one's own ends, remains a potent tool whether wielded by a medieval monarch or a modern-day populist. The parallel extends to the realm of surveillance. Theron's secret police, a shadowy network of informants and spies, monitored his subjects' every move, suppressing dissent and eliminating perceived threats. Their methods were brutal, often relying on torture and intimidation, but their purpose, to maintain control through fear, remains a tragically relevant objective. In the modern era, surveillance takes on a more technologically advanced form, but its function remains the same. The proliferation of CCTV cameras, the mass collection of data by technology companies, the use of facial recognition technology, these all contribute to a pervasive climate of surveillance that chills free expression and reinforces the power of the state. The difference lies primarily in the scale and sophistication of the tools, not in their underlying purpose. Furthermore, the power struggles within Theron's court resonate profoundly with the contemporary political scene. The constant jockeying for position, the backstabbing, the betrayals, the relentless pursuit of power, these are not merely historical artifacts. They are recurring themes in the ongoing drama of political life, whether played out in the halls of medieval castles or the corridors of modern parliaments. The quest for influence, the manipulation of alliances, the deployment of smear campaigns, these tactics remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The subtle shift in power dynamics, the strategic betrayals, the carefully cultivated rivalries, all serve as a reminder that the human desire for power is an enduring force, largely unaffected by the passage of time or technological advancement. The parallels are not limited to the mechanics of power. They extend to the very nature of leadership itself. Theron, like many autocrats throughout history, cultivated a cult of personality, presenting himself as an indispensable leader, a figure almost divinely appointed. This image, carefully constructed and relentlessly promoted, helped to solidify his grip on power. The modern political equivalent is the charismatic leader, the populist figure who appeals directly to the emotions of the electorate, bypassing traditional political structures and institutions. These figures often cultivate an image of being above reproach, immune to criticism, and directly connected to the will of the people. This cult of personality, regardless of era, is a powerful tool that allows leaders to consolidate power and silence opposition. Even the absurd decrees issued by Theron find their counterparts in the modern world. His edicts, often arbitrary and cruel, served to assert his absolute authority and maintain a climate of fear. While modern laws are generally more complex and less arbitrary, the intent can be surprisingly similar. Laws used to stifle dissent, to restrict freedoms in the name of security, to silence opposition voices. These are modern echoes of Theron's decrees, demonstrating that the abuse of power often manifests through legal channels, clothed in the veneer of legitimacy. The parallels between Theron's reign and the contemporary political landscape are not intended to suggest a direct equivalency. The historical context is vastly different, and the specific manifestations of power are distinct. However, the underlying principles, the manipulation of information, the suppression of dissent, the exploitation of fear and insecurity, the cult of personality, transcend time and place. They are recurring themes in the human drama, a dark comedy played out on the stage of history, with its cast of characters consistently employing the same cynical tactics, albeit with increasingly sophisticated tools. The lessons of the past, therefore, are not merely historical curiosities. They are vital warnings, stark reminders of the enduring fragility of democracy and the constant vigilance required to safeguard it. The echoes of tyranny, though faint at times, persist, a haunting reminder of the enduring human capacity for cruelty and self-destruction. And understanding these echoes, recognizing them in the seemingly innocuous events of the modern day, is crucial to preserving the hard-won gains of freedom and protecting ourselves from the ever-present threat of authoritarianism. The fight, it seems, is far from over. It's a perpetual struggle, a ceaseless vigilance against the insidious creep of tyranny, a constant battle against the enduring allure of absolute power. The echoes of Theron's reign should serve as a relentless call to action, a stark reminder that freedom is a fragile thing, easily lost and painstakingly regained. The cruelty and hypocrisy revealed in the reigns of history's tyrants are not mere historical curiosities, relegated to dusty textbooks and forgotten footnotes. They are rather unsettlingly prescient warnings, stark reminders of the ever-present potential for such horrors to resurface in our own time. The casual disregard for human life, the systematic oppression of dissenting voices, the manipulation of narratives to maintain power. These are not relics of a bygone era, but rather deeply ingrained aspects of the human condition. Theron and countless others like him served as cautionary tales, their actions echoing through the corridors of power, whispering insidious suggestions in the ears of ambitious leaders across the centuries. Consider, for instance, the pervasive nature of propaganda. Theron's relatively simplistic methods, court poets, and carefully crafted documents pale in comparison to the sophisticated machinery of modern disinformation. The internet, with its capacity for viral dissemination and echo chambers, has amplified the potential for manipulation exponentially. The targeted advertising, the fake news articles, the coordinated social media campaigns, these are the modern equivalents of Theron's carefully crafted narratives, designed not just to inform, but to deceive, to manipulate, to control. And the terrifying aspect is the sheer scale. Theron could only reach a limited number of subjects, while modern propagators can reach millions, even billions, instantly. Moreover, the hypocrisy is amplified. Theron presented himself as a benevolent ruler, a shepherd protecting his flock, while simultaneously orchestrating the torture and execution of his enemies. Modern despots employ a similar strategy, often cloaking their authoritarian actions in the language of democracy, freedom, and national security. They might invoke the need to protect their citizens from external threats while simultaneously suppressing internal dissent with ruthless efficiency. They might speak eloquently of freedom of speech while systematically silencing any voices that challenge their authority. This dissonance, this stark contrast between public pronouncements and private actions, is a hallmark of tyranny, a testament to the capacity of the powerful to convince others of their virtue while perpetrating horrific acts. The cult of personality, another recurring theme, is particularly insidious. Theron cultivated a mystique around his leadership, portraying himself as an almost divinely appointed figure, indispensable to the well-being of his kingdom. Modern leaders did often achieve a similar effect through carefully crafted public images, strategic media appearances, and the constant reinforcement of their own importance. The manufactured charisma, the carefully cultivated aura of invincibility. This creates an environment where criticism is silenced and dissent is suppressed. The followers become so enamored by the leader's image that they fail to see the flaws, the hypocrisy, the cruelty. They blindly accept the pronouncements, ignoring the evidence that contradicts the narrative. The tools may have changed, but the fundamental strategy remains the same. Theron used spies and informants to monitor his subjects. Modern states employ sophisticated surveillance technologies, collecting vast amounts of data on their citizens, often without their knowledge or consent. The justification is usually framed as a necessary measure to protect national security, but the potential for abuse is immense. The ability to track citizens' movements, monitor their communications, and even predict their behavior, this presents a chilling glimpse into a potential future where freedom is constrained by ever-present surveillance. This parallels the legal systems often utilized by tyrants throughout history. Theron's decrees might have been arbitrary and cruel, but modern states often employ sophisticated legal mechanisms to stifle dissent and control their populations. Laws passed under the guise of protecting national security or maintaining public order can effectively curtail fundamental freedoms, silencing opposition and creating an environment of fear. The chilling precision of these systems lies in their ability to appear legitimate, to function within the existing framework of laws and institutions, while simultaneously eroding the very principles they purport to uphold. Beyond the specifics of individual reigns, a broader reflection is needed on the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and hypocrisy. It's not a matter of identifying specific bad apples, but recognizing that the seeds of tyranny can exist within us all. The desire for power, the tendency to justify our actions, the willingness to compromise our principles for personal gain, these are all inherent aspects of the human condition. The challenge, therefore, is not to eradicate these tendencies entirely, but to develop the critical thinking skills necessary to recognize them in ourselves and in others. The lessons of history, then, are not simply a collection of past events, but a mirror reflecting back at us our own potential for both greatness and depravity. The echoes of Theron's cruelty and hypocrisy are not faint whispers from a distant past. They are resounding warnings, reminders of the fragility of freedom and the constant vigilance required to protect it. We are all responsible for safeguarding our democracies, for actively resisting the allure of authoritarianism, and for demanding transparency and accountability from those in power. The fight against tyranny is not a historical footnote. It's a perpetual struggle, a battle that requires constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a steadfast commitment to the values of justice, freedom, and equality. The past serves as a guide, not just to understanding the mechanics of tyranny, but to the ever-present human capacity for both good and evil, and the ongoing need to ensure that the scales tilt towards the good. Only by acknowledging this dual capacity within ourselves and relentlessly examining the actions of those who wield power can we hope to prevent the recurrence of such atrocities. The fight, as history so relentlessly demonstrates, is far from over. The shadows of tyranny linger, waiting for an opportunity to reassert themselves. Eternal vigilance, as they say, is the price of liberty. And in the age of information manipulation and sophisticated surveillance, that vigilance needs to be sharper, more informed, and more relentless than ever before. The echoes of cruelty and hypocrisy may be faint, but they are persistent. Ignoring them comes at a cost.